trivialise Hitler and the Holocaust and the Gestapo and all the hideous atrocities that happened in World War II, or in the 1930s and 40s, I should say, really. So, you've asked the wrong bloke, Jesse. I think Trump's a clown with little relevance and little political future.
I agree with you, and as you said, it trivialises all the Holocaust and the horror of World War II. Yeah. And I sit there in front of the news, actually I turn it off, because what annoys me is all this media attention this man is getting. Look at us, we're talking about it, and he doesn't deserve it. What credibility does he have, and what influence does he have on the state of his country or Western world, Western politics? I just think he doesn't deserve any of this attention. And I was quite sad to see that Anne Frank's stepsister had stepped in and said something, and of course the sensational media will lap it up. And I just think that's an awful thing to do. And Anne Frank was such an amazing young girl that I think every child read that book. And he just doesn't deserve any of this. And I think he's an absolute crock.
We tend to forget so quickly that the primary season of the American presidential election always produces idiots. Every 4 years we get a Donald Trump of some magnitude popping up and blazing their way across the political stage for a moment or two, then they disappear, thank goodness. And that's what's happening. The grown-ups then take over, and reasonable candidates are put forward.
Michael, you're a politician, so you're qualified to tell me what is the appeal, particularly to his core, which is white working-class voters. What are they responding to?
Golly, I'm not that kind of politician. I can't explain that to you. He's a showman. He's got a TV image. He's hugely wealthy. He can buy virtually anything he wants, and I guess that includes political support.
What do you think, Sally? What do you think?
He's just a manufactured candidate, in my opinion.
What do you think his appeal is?
I feel his appeal is that ridiculous hairdo. And I think these people, I'm going to defame a lot of America, I think they're not that bright. I mean, for goodness sake, what decent policies does he have? What positive things can he do for the whole of the US? I just think he's got all this attention, undeserved, and so they think, oh, I remember that name, so I'll vote for him.
I agree with your assessments of Donald Trump, but I think you're both underestimating how beloved he is at the moment and how much support he's getting. Michael, you're writing him off.
Well, I am, because his support is coming from the white working class, by and large, and they are a minority group in the United States. When you look at the demographics of the American electorate, Jesse, and when you add in the middle class, the educated, the Latinos and the black Americans, and you've got a majority every time. And none of those people are going to vote for Trump.
Now, Stephen sent me a message. He points out that when people compare Trump to Hitler, they are meaning 1934 Hitler. Early on, people accepted the man was a nut, but his populist nastiness won the day. Trump is a danger. We will move on. At 4 minutes to 5 last week, we were privy to the extent of the pay gap between men and women in the public service. The greatest pay gap in New Zealand was 39% in the Defence Force. Now the author of an article in the Huffington Post is urging workers to start asking each other how much they earn. He says it's a good way to combat pay inequality. In the fight for equal pay, studies show it's imperative that employees be able to compare salaries, especially if they're doing similar work and not paid the same. Knowing pay information gives us the bargaining power we need when negotiating salary. Would you ever do that, Sally?
I maybe would.
You're a journalist. You're not afraid of tough questions.
I think it's an excellent... I mean, people can ask their fellow work colleagues. I'd support it, and all they can do is say no if they don't want to. Mm-hmm. And I think it's also a female thing that we don't barter enough for salaries, and we don't ask enough questions sometimes when it comes to pay. And I would absolutely support people, everybody, comparing their salaries. And it's been considered inappropriate to talk about it, but let's change it, turn it around.
Do you think male journalists are paid more than female journalists?
I know they used to be. I contract now and freelance.
What about freelancers then? Do you think subconsciously an editor offers more money to a male journalist?
I do not know. I'll have to go and ask them. I'm going to go and have a beer with a few male journalists and ask them what they get per word.
Okay. Michael Zika, would you ever ask a colleague how much they were earning?
I don't remember doing that. Mind you, I was a school teacher most of my working life, although I was a journalist a good bit of the time too. And school teachers always knew what everybody was getting because we were on pay scales, and we all pretty much knew who was on what salary scale, and it didn't matter. It wasn't material. But you talked about TUI billboards before, Jesse. I think there's another one coming on. The free market will deliver equity. Yeah, right. So long as people talk about it and know about it, somehow equity will happen. What a lot of codswallop. You look at the countries which have got some degree of pay equity, and they are all working at it with clearly defined policies and regulations and frameworks. What have we got? We've got laissez-faire. Let it happen. It'll come. Don't worry about it. And what happens? It gets worse.
As an American, I've just got to put this one in, it looks interesting, a text that's just come through. As an American, I can tell you Trump's appeal. For years, the right has been told they are racist bigots. Along comes Trump and speaks what these people have been thinking. When he's called a bigot, he tells them to stuff it, and people respond to that. There you go.
That's a good reason for voting for somebody.
All right. And time for another one. I don't think we're going to have time for the question about... let's make it a quick one. Okay, in Australia, a man was fired for pushing a fully clothed colleague into a swimming pool at the Christmas do. So what do you think, Sally? Should he have been fired?
No, because imagine all the people that would be fired around New Zealand every year at Christmas do's.
Michael Deakin.
He also punched his manager and abused him. He deserved to be sacked.
Oh, well, if it was just the pool.
How racy do those Otago Regional Council Christmas parties get, Michael?
We don't have swimming pools.
Nice to have you both on. Nice to talk to you.
Very
Thanks
good,
so
Jesse.
much.
Thanks, Jesse.
And I'll be back on Monday from 1 to 4. Jim will be back soon too.
Kia ora everyone, welcome to Checkpoint with John Campbell on RNZ National. We're on the radio, we're screening live on Freeview Channel 50, and we are streaming live on the RNZ website. However you're doing so, thank you for joining us. Tonight, Helen Kelly is our guest with us here in the studio. Zika, no transmission in New Zealand, but 9 cases identified here. And a warning for Olympians about Rio. We're at the Mangere Refugee Resettlement Centre as the first of the Syrian refugees under the new quota are welcomed to their new home. And Vanuatu, a tough 12 months keeps getting tougher. But first, here's Katrina Batten with RNZ News.
Kia ora, good evening. 9 people who recently arrived in New Zealand from the South Pacific have been recorded as having the Zika virus. One of them, a 47-year-old Waikato man, has been admitted to Waikato Hospital with symptoms of a neurological condition thought to be linked to Zika. The mosquito-borne virus is widespread through the Caribbean, Central and South America and has been linked to severe birth defects in thousands of Brazilian babies. The Chief Medical Officer for the Ministry of Health, Dr. Don Mackey, says information about the virus is changing all the time, but it advises women should delay getting pregnant once returning from Zika-infected countries.
Pregnancy is a time which is a very special time for everybody, and anything which might be perceived as threatening or being a threat to the mother and baby assumes a high degree of prominence in people's minds. We're at the moment thinking that if you delay the onset of pregnancy or planning for pregnancy until maybe 3 weeks after travel, that may provide a bit of safety.
Dr. Mackey says the ministry has extended its specific travel advice on the virus to include Tonga as well as Samoa as an area of active transmission. The New Zealand Olympic Committee is also advising all athletes who are pregnant or hoping to get pregnant in the near future not to travel to the Games in Brazil in August. The World Health Organization, meanwhile, describes the spread of the Zika virus as explosive and has called an emergency meeting on Monday. The latest book by journalist Ian Wishart on the murder of Ben Smart and Olivia Hope has been withdrawn from sale after a legal threat. Wishart's book, Elementary, was released this morning. However, this afternoon it was withdrawn from sale. The author of the book on the same case, Keith Hunter, confirmed he made the legal threat. He says he's currently reading Wishart's book. Government grants to a big French video game maker that's suddenly quitting New Zealand have been suspended. The Paris-listed company Gameloft has confirmed its Auckland studio has been shut down, costing 150 jobs. But the company has still not explained why. A spokesperson for Callaghan Innovation, Ian Butler, says his organisation made grants of just over $3.5 million to Gameloft over several years.
We've received confirmation that the New Zealand operation of Gameloft is going to cease, and that means that we are now in a position to suspend the growth grant we've awarded them, and we can now begin the process of looking to claw that money back.
Ian Butler says how long that takes depends in part on Gameloft's cooperation. The Science and Innovation Minister, Stephen Joyce, says he isn't embarrassed by Gameloft's exit just months after it was lauded for using the grants to create jobs. Export New Zealand says the loss of cross-party support on free trade is deeply concerning. The Labour Party says it cannot support the Trans-Pacific Partnership in its current form, although one of its MPs will cross the floor to vote with the government. The Executive Director Export New Zealand, Catherine Beard, says Labour's decision not to support the 12-nation trade deal is hugely disappointing. She says for quite a few decades now there's been cross-party consensus on free trade, and Labour's position removes certainty for exporters. Labour says its decision is because the TPP includes provisions that cut across the country's sovereignty. The number of building consents for new dwellings last year hit an 11-year high, driven by growth in Auckland and its surrounding regions. Statistics New Zealand says the number of consents issued for 2015 rose nearly 10% to more than 27,000, the highest since 2004. In December, more than 2,500 housing consents were issued, the third consecutive monthly rise. An ANZ Bank senior economist, Philip Borkin, says the Canterbury earthquake rebuild is winding down, but there's plenty of other work.
These numbers suggest there's plenty of work going on around the rest of the country to at least offset that over the next little while and look at housing needs in Auckland, the infrastructure announcements we've seen recently and the commercial building activity that should follow hot on the heels of that. Look, there's certainly plenty to be optimistic about for the construction sector over the next little while.
Philip Borkin says construction will remain a solid driver of economic growth this year. The Whakatane District Council has narrowly voted to remove fluoride from its water supply after 44 years of the practice, which protects against tooth decay. Councillors have voted 6-5 to scrap fluoridation, despite 60% of residents voting to retain it in a referendum 2 years ago. The Mayor, Tony Bon, who moved the resolution, says he was convinced by the evidence against fluoridation. However, his deputy, Judy Turner, who voted against the measure, says it's bad news for the community, which has high levels of deprivation. She says central government needs to take the lead on fluoridation. Paul Kantner, one of the founding members of the 1960s San Francisco psychedelic rock band Jefferson Airplane, has died, aged 74. It's reported he had complications after a heart attack. In sport, the disgraced Sydney Roosters halfback Mitchell Pearce has admitted he has a problem with alcohol. Pearce briefly addressed media today and apologised for his lewd behaviour at a boozy Australia Day party when he simulated a sex act with a dog at a private residence and allegedly urinated on himself and a couch.
I would like to unreservedly apologise to everyone for my actions over the last couple of days. My behaviour was unacceptable. I'm embarrassed to take full responsibility for my actions. I acknowledge that I have a problem with alcohol and something I need to address. It's not an excuse, but a realisation that I finally need help.
Mitchell Pearce did not take questions from reporters. Meanwhile, the Warriors star Shaun Johnson has been confirmed to make his return from a broken ankle in next weekend's Auckland Nines. The Roosters import Roger Tuivasa-Sheck will make his Warriors debut at the Nines. The Black Caps bowling coach Dimitri Mascarenas is stepping down at the end of the summer to spend more time with his family and in Melbourne. And Milos Raonic can make Canada's Canadian men's tennis history tonight if he can become the first man representing Canada to reach a Grand Slam singles final. Raonic faces the second seed Scot Andy Murray in the second semi-final tonight in Melbourne to see he'll play defending champion Novak Djokovic in Sunday's final. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Don Henley, founding member of the Eagles, in concert and in conversation after 11. Country Life goes fishing after 9. We check in on the Pioneer. It's a mountain biking race between Christchurch and Mount Cook. We go crazy in our Sonic Tonic and reassess the musical career of this drummer. Join me, Brian Crump, on the air tonight on RNZ National.
Met Service weather to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, the Central High Country, also Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Fine spells with scattered showers during the afternoons and evenings, some heavy and possibly thundery from Bay of Plenty southwards and also in Northland tomorrow. Whanganui to Kapiti, generally fine, however isolated showers tomorrow, mainly about the ranges. Wellington and Wairarapa often cloudy with isolated showers for a time tomorrow. Marlborough, Nelson and Buller, a mix of fine and cloudy periods with isolated showers, mainly about the ranges. Westland and Fiordland, mainly fine apart from isolated showers about the ranges today. Canterbury, Otago and Southland, cloudy near the coast with patchy drizzle, fine spells inland with isolated showers today. And the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with a few showers. It's almost 5.
Thank you so much, Katrina. We'll see you in about 22 minutes. More on that Gameloft story coming up. Katrina mentioned it in news. Government grants and job losses. What was going on there? We'll look at that, but we're going to begin tonight with the news that 9 people have been treated for the Zika virus in New Zealand in the past month. As you've heard, 4 of them had been in Tonga, 4 in Samoa. The 9th case has not been specified. 8 of the 9 are not unwell. That's an important detail, but 1 of them is in Waikato Hospital with a condition that can lead to a form of paralysis. This is nearly always temporary. The World Health Organization now says the mosquito-borne virus is spreading, quote, explosively. Its impact in Brazil, particularly as a cause of serious birth defects, has led to the extraordinary situation where the New Zealand Olympic Committee has today advised athletes or officials who are pregnant or hoping to get pregnant in the near future not to travel to the Olympics in Rio de Janeiro in August. More on that in a moment. But first, Chief Medical Officer Dr. Don Mackey talks about the condition of the patient in hospital in Hamilton.
It's been known for a little while that Guillain-Barré, which is a relatively rare neurological condition that causes a slowly ascending paralysis, which then usually wears off completely over a period of time. It's been known that Zika is one of the things that might trigger that or is associated with it. There are a range of other things that cause Guillain-Barré, and sometimes we have no idea what the cause is. So yes, there's a patient who's in Waikato Hospital. He presented with Guillain-Barré, and in the course of taking a history, they discovered that he had recently been to Tonga, did the testing and discovered that he had a history of a bit of a flu-like illness, a bit of a rash. Led them to think about Zika. They tested and he turned out positive. So he's being looked after in hospital. There's no specific treatment for Guillain-Barré. It's very supportive treatment in intensive care, and that's where he is now. I was talking to the team there earlier today. He's stable, but they expect he's going to have a few weeks in intensive care as he goes through the disease.
So what does this lead you to assess about Tonga? Does it join Samoa as places with Ministry of Health advisories now?
Yes, it does. We've recognised that the mosquito that transmits this virus, which transmits a whole range of other diseases, including dengue, chikungunya, is endemic across the Pacific. We've now got a number of cases, as you say, from Samoa and Tonga, or travel history to Samoa and Tonga, who have come back and who we have tested positive for Zika. So all of those areas we would consider part of the area of concern. But I've got to go back a little bit, John. When we think about those other diseases that are carried by mosquitoes, particularly by this species of mosquito, the Aedes mosquito, those are common. The real advice to anybody travelling up into those areas, which are spread across the Pacific, is avoid being bitten by a mosquito in the first place. That's the primary, the tackling the mosquito and avoiding mosquito bites is the primary prevention here.
How bad is the situation in Brazil now, particularly given this Olympic Committee warning about women who may be becoming pregnant, not potentially going to the Olympics, which seems extraordinary? Is there real concern about what's happening in Brazil?
I think if I go back to the information that we picked up from the WHO overnight, and we've got people in Geneva who are at that briefing for member states, there is still some uncertainty about the connection between Zika virus and the birth defects. However, what they're seeing in Brazil is Zika is affecting a lot of people there. They've seen this rise in birth defects in the northeastern part of Brazil. Correlation doesn't mean causation, and there's a lot of work going on. WHO's convening an emergency committee on Monday, which will set about reviewing the evidence and trying to work out scientifically what is going on here. In the meantime, we, Centres of Disease Control and other countries, are advising a degree of prudence that people might, if they're in the early stages of pregnancy or potentially becoming pregnant, just to take, rethink, maybe delay their travel plans if they can. And I go back to those blanket sort of mosquito precautions as well.
Dr. Mackey, you used the phrase a degree of prudence. There now seems to be a suggestion that actually women who may become pregnant in the next 2 years simply don't go to Brazil at all, including athletes at the Olympic Games. Is this being overstated now, do you think?
I think new information is coming in all the time, and it in some ways how you respond reflects what the information you have in front of you, and how concerned you are. Appreciate that. Pregnancy is a time which it's a very special time for everybody, and anything which might be perceived as threatening or being a threat to the mother and baby assumes a high degree of prominence in people's minds. Very much understanding that. The question is, what does a 2-year time frame give us? We're at the moment thinking that it may be that if you delay the onset of pregnancy or planning for pregnancy until maybe 3 weeks after travel, that may provide a bit of safety. But again, new information is coming in all the time, and we're working internationally to get that. And as new information comes in, we will make sure that we tell the people of New Zealand and the clinicians and other people. We've been talking with Sport New Zealand and through to Olympic Committee just to make sure that we're all lined up with the same information and the same interpretation.
Dr. Don Mackey, who's the Chief Medical Officer for the Ministry of Health. What is going on here? Growing concerns over the Zika virus have caused the New Zealand Olympic Committee to advise all athletes who are pregnant or hoping to get pregnant in the near future not to travel to the Rio Games in August. Barbara Kendall is a 5-time Olympian, winner of a gold, a silver, a bronze, and the first New Zealand female to compete at that many Olympic Games. She's a 3-time world board sailing champion and also mother of 2 daughters. She became a mum while still an Olympian. In fact, a world title and 2 more Olympics were to follow her becoming a mother. She joins us now by Skype video call from Awaroa Beach. Barbara, it's lovely to talk to you as always. This is a nightmare decision for athletes, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, it's also, I think it's, it makes a big question for those that are wanting to retire after the Olympics or have children after the Olympics, whether they want to take that risk or not. I would doubt very many of the athletes will be pregnant at the Olympic Games because it's not a very safe thing to do. Yes. It's not a good decision to do if you want to get a peak performance, become pregnant at the Olympic Games. But afterwards, and I don't think we have enough research yet to tell us how long that virus stays in your body to when the safe period begins or ends. But, if I was an athlete and, because both after Sydney and Athens, I was pregnant virtually 3 weeks after the Olympic Games, I'd be questioning my decision and probably delaying it for a little bit till I got the all clear, that's for sure.
I think, yes, this is confusing now because we were hearing 2 years. Dr. Don Mackey just said 3 weeks. So this is really confusing. There seems to be a lack of clarity around information. But when you think how hard you have to train and how much you have to sacrifice to be an Olympian, the idea that actually you've got to either give up on becoming a parent for a period of time or give up on your Olympic dream, it's just a terrible decision.
It is a big decision because it's such a either one is such a life-changing experience, decision. But, if I put my hat on of an athlete, if I'd been training for, we know it's a minimum of about 8 years, it's 10,000 hours, you would go, right, I could sacrifice maybe another, whatever it takes to know that I'm clear of the virus before I got pregnant. So it's a big decision, but I think if you're a smart person, you go, okay, I'm going to go to the Olympic Games, I've worked my life for this, I'm going to do it, tick that box, and then I'll look at, starting a family once I'm all clear.
Yeah, Barbara Kendall, thank you, Barbara. Really nice to talk to you as always. Barbara Kendall, who was joining us by Skype from Awaroa Beach. We're going to try and get some clarity, obviously, over the stand-down period. Once you return from a Zika-infested area. Is it 3 weeks? Is it 2 years? There really seems to be no certainty about all of this, and that would seem really material in terms of making the decision. But gosh, you've got to work hard, and it's just a statement of the obvious to become an Olympic athlete. It's 5:17 on Checkpoint. The first Syrian refugees to arrive in New Zealand under the newly increased quota were welcomed with the pōhiri in Auckland today. The 82 refugees arrived in New Zealand last week, along with others from Myanmar, Afghanistan, Colombia, Palestine and Iraq. All 157 refugees will stay at the Mangere Refugee Resettlement Centre for 6 weeks. It's there they'll begin to settle into their new lives as New Zealanders, learning the skills they'll need to make this country their own. And some of the refugees have very big dreams. Our reporter Alex Ashton spoke to some of them at the pōhiri.
Khalid Al-Jouja, his wife Aisha, their 3 young children and Khalid's father have left a war-torn life in Syria behind. They first fled to Lebanon 4 years ago and finally arrived in New Zealand last week. Speaking through a translator, Mr Al-Jouja says at home children were shot randomly on the street and those who tried to help were shot too.
I have seen lots of individuals, lots of people in pieces, not even a whole bodies, scattered in the streets, in the roads, everywhere, and we were not able to help anybody.
The Al-Jouja family's stories are strikingly common at the Mangere Resettlement Centre. They're part of New Zealand's latest intake of 157 refugees. More than half of them are Syrian, and are the first to arrive since the government announced it would take an extra 750 refugees from the war-torn country last September. Today they were officially welcomed to New Zealand. They'll stay at the centre for 6 weeks, learning English and getting prepared to find a job or go to school in a new and unfamiliar country. They'll then be moved to new homes around the North Island. Sitting among the crowd at the pōwhiri is Mohammed Kak, another recent Syrian arrival.
It is very, very, very dangerous. You can't imagine. You are sitting in your house, in your place, a bomb can come and kill you, destroy you. So to that extent, it's very dangerous.
Mr Kak describes New Zealand as heaven on earth, and he sees a future here for him and his family.
We have never had an expectation we will be welcomed to this extent. It has been a very welcoming society and community, hosting community. So I've got a lot of dreams that I would like to achieve, but one of them would be like have a small open business of sweet and some bakery sort of thing.
The Al-Jouja family have also been overwhelmed by the welcome they've received.
I don't want my kids to live in fear. I don't want them to go through whatever I actually went through. I want them to finish school and get the best education. And we hope that we will find the rights we actually lost back home.
But Khalid and Aisha Al-Jouja say most of their families still stuck in Syria and Lebanon, and they desperately want them to be a part of their new life in New Zealand. The government will decide later this year whether to increase its refugee quota or change the countries from where people are given preference. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Alex Ashton.
5 minutes past 5. Coming up next, a Vanuatu resort owner counts the cost of lost tourism after Virgin Australia joins Qantas and Air New Zealand in suspending services to Vanuatu. This is just one resort owner, but this is an economic catastrophe for Vanuatu if it's not resolved soon. Later in the show, Whakatane votes to remove fluoride from its water supply. The Deputy Mayor is with us. What is with Gameloft? They receive government subsidies, they're laying people off and leaving. What is that all about? We'll look at that. You can tweet us. We would love to hear from you. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. You can Facebook us, Checkpoint with John Campbell, or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. We've been a bit remiss on the text too, but you can text and people like to. The text number is 2101. Another airline has joined Air New Zealand and Qantas in suspending all services to Vanuatu. This time it's Virgin Australia, who've been operating 3 return flights a week between Brisbane and Port Vila. Pretty popular flights too. At issue, the safety of the airport runway, of course. But this is a disaster for Vanuatu. This is a country whose GDP is less than $1 billion. After Cyclone Pam, which not only caused immense damage but drove tourists away in numbers that still haven't recovered, another assault on tourism is potentially, as I said before, an economic catastrophe. Owen Drew owns the Tranquility Island Resort in Port Vila and also runs day cruises taking people out for a day at the beach exploring the ocean and surrounds. I asked him about the impact of suspending flights on businesses like his.
Well, the immediate impact for us, and even just this morning, we're getting cancellations where people can't come because their flight's been cancelled, or they're under the impression that it's too dangerous for them to fly. Basically it's the runway, that's not the aircraft or anything like that. But we are having cancellations, and the number of people who are actually inquiring has dropped right away. And of course, even though we still have some tourists here at the moment, our walk-in off the street customers are starting to dry up.
Okay, so after Cyclone Pam,
time.
This is a disaster, isn't it?
Yeah, well, in some ways it's very similar, except that the hardship is not there from the humanitarian point of view, but it means that our business and everyone involved in tourism, and of course it flows on from there, we're going to be very hard pushed to make ends meet. So at the moment we're planning on putting some of our staff on leave. At the moment we're doing maintenance, and it's a bit of a concern, yes.
How many people do you think this would have cost you in terms of cancelled bookings? How many people do you think you've lost? And would that be representative of the industry right through Vanuatu?
Yeah, well, I'd rather put it in percentage rather than numbers, because we're fairly small, but at the same time it's hard to... This is only very new. It's only been the last week that we've had this situation. So I would say probably 50% of people who have booked are now cancelling. And we have 2 operations. One is a resort, and we've had bookings for the next couple of months, which are now all up in the air. And just this morning I had a couple of cancellations for people arriving tomorrow from New Zealand who are not, because of the flight. Also, we have our cruise ship operation, day cruise, which is very, very popular. And we rely mainly on walk-in people for that, and that's going to dry up. And of the people who have booked in advance, they're all coming back saying that they're putting their cruise on hold. So it's all a big question mark and very disturbing, yes.
And Owen, how long do you think you can keep on for like this if the runway isn't fixed?
Well, I'd say for the next month we're probably going to be okay. We can pull on some of the little reserves that we have to see us through that, but we need some good publicity once it's all go, and we need people to come back. If you'd like to see what the weather's like here today, I can just flick this this machine for you.
Do it.
If I can find the button to push. Where am I?
So if you've got a laptop, just turn it round. Just turn the whole thing around.
Right, well I did have something here for you to have a look at. Can you see there?
Oh yeah, I can. That looks good.
This is my backyard. But as you can see, we've got coconut trees there, blue sky, beautiful clear water, and that's a little resort next door, and the harbour of Port Vila in the background.
And not a tourist to be seen.
Not a tourist to be seen.
I'd love to hear from you if you've cancelled trips to Vanuatu or are thinking about doing so. Supporters flooding in for a Christchurch man's plan to buy a private beach for sale in the Abel Tasman National Park. Dwayne Major and Adam Gardner hatched a plan on Christmas Day to publicly fundraise to buy the beach, then gift it back to the people of New Zealand. This slither of lovely beach is for sale by tender. If the money raised is insufficient, the money won't be collected. In other words, donors are guaranteed they'll contribute successfully or they won't contribute at all. Now, when Dwayne did his first media interview with us on Monday night, he had $6,000. Now it's a different story.
Mate, we've cracked $500,000, $500,000. We're on our way.
Yeah, that's phenomenal, really, isn't it? Because there's nothing in it for people other than the notion that the land will be retained in New Zealand ownership.
Well, there's a chance to say something and to do something. You know, you look at things. When I first looked at it, I thought, oh, there's not much we can do about this, but there is something to be done about it. And so, I'm getting a lot out of it, to be honest.
Yeah, I love I'm looking at the numbers. You've had about 8,500 donors, 119 people who've given $1. So they just wanted to be part of it. Maybe that's all they had, but they just wanted to say, hey, we're here and we support you.
And the thing they do is a lot of them are writing little notes as they pledge. And I was honestly about 1 o'clock last night. I just can't close the laptop. I read every single one of those last night, and it is really inspirational, really connecting between people. So yeah, I suppose I'm privileged enough to be witnessing all this. And this will certainly go down in my memoirs as a week to remember.
And what sort of thing are the notes saying?
Oh. Hi, I wish I could give more. This is my last $7 for the week, but this is worth it. It's for my kids. It's so good to be able to say a statement to the country about what we care about. It goes on and on and on. People from Australia, people from overseas. It's just, it's inspiring. And the numbers, they go from right from $1 to $10,000 one person gave. It's awesome.
Dwayne, do you think that this is a representation of a larger sense, a larger concern in New Zealand about the loss of land?
Yeah, about the loss of land, but also the aspiration to keep it and to look after it and to share it. And I think it's something about, it's unearthed a value that we want to hold on to, but also a value we want to pass on and have our kids sort of experience that as well. And I suppose also having this sort of telephone sort of feel reminds me of being a kid. And I have those precious memories. And I'd love to think over this next week or so, there are young people that get some real cool memories from this generation too.
Yeah, so how much do you think you need? Obviously, this is a tender process and you don't know who you're competing against, but how much are you aiming for now?
Exactly. Well, like I say, we're going for the 2 mil because that's simply what they put in the paper in the first place. We're hoping for some big hitters to maybe help us across the line on that last bit. And there have been some conversations starting to happen. But, if you want to help us out there to get us across the line, it's going to be an interesting process with tender. But I've been talking to the QE2 Trust and they're willing to help as required. And so there's a bunch of conversations that I believe when it comes to the wire, we'll be able to cross that line pretty safely. But Give a Little has allowed people to donate on top of the 2 million. So yeah, we'll be hopefully talking shop pretty soon. But right now, it's a matter of people getting on and just giving and showing their support and actually tangibly expressing this vision and values for New Zealand.
Dwayne, very quickly, the biggest donation so far, the biggest single donation of the 8,500 donations is 20 grand. Was that an individual or corporate money? Do you know?
I believe that was Spark. And I'm so stoked that because I know it's cliche and but they're helping spark that next level of inclusion. And so now Kathmandu has joined in the play, and these companies are able to be, what's the word, agile enough to actually just see it and get on board with it. And I think those companies are brilliant. They can actually just not sit around and talk about it, but just get out there and do it and support the average person on the street, just thinking this is what we care about.
Coming up, New Zealand's first ever people trafficking trial comes to an end. And former CTU President Helen Kelly joins us to discuss some big stuff: her terminal illness, access to cannabis for pain relief, the issue of assisted dying and fighting for what you believe in. But first, here's Katrina with the headlines.
The New Zealand Olympic Committee is advising all athletes who are pregnant or hoping to get pregnant in the near future not to travel to the Games in Brazil in August because of the Zika virus. The World Health Organization is describing the spread of the virus as explosive and has called an emergency meeting on Monday. 9 people who recently arrived in New Zealand from the South Pacific have been recorded as having the Zika virus. The Ministry of Health says information about the virus is changing all the time, but it has extended its specific travel advice on the virus to include Tonga and Samoa. The latest book by journalist Ian Wishart on the murder of Ben Smote and Olivia Hope has been withdrawn from sale after a legal threat. Wishart's book, Elementary, was released this morning, but the author of a book on the same case, Keith Hunter, has confirmed he made the legal threat. The government says it's not embarrassed about a big French video game maker quitting New Zealand, despite the company getting $3.5 million in Crown grants. The Paris-listed company Gameloft has closed its Auckland studio, but Science and Innovation Minister Stephen Joyce expects the grant agency Callaghan Innovation to be repaid. The number of building consents for new dwellings last year has hit an 11-year high, driven by growth in Auckland and its surrounding regions. Statistics New Zealand says the number of consents issued for 2015 rose nearly 10% to more than 27,000. The Whakatane District Council has narrowly voted to remove fluoride from all its water supplies after 44 years of the practice, which protects against tooth decay. Councillors have voted 6-5 to scrap fluoridation, despite 60% of residents voting to retain it in a referendum 2 years ago. I'll have more news, sport and weather at 6.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Let's turn to business now with Giles Beckford. And Giles, who is joining us from Wellington, I can't believe the intro I've got, because we're going to look ahead to next week, which suggests that today was a really boring day, was it, in business news?
It wasn't a boring day, John. We never have boring days in business.
No.
But I figure, look, what's gone has gone. Right?
Okay, it was a boring day, Giles.
And Checkpoint is a forward-looking programme.
Well, let's look forward. What's happening this week? There's actually, Graham Wheeler, of course, had the OCR announcement this week, but in fact his big set-piece speech is next week, isn't it?
Yes, he's got one down in Christchurch. It's an annual gathering organised by Canterbury manufacturers and exporters. And central bank governors have been going there for years and years and years. And it's where they sort of lay out their view of the world. Early in the year, they get to set expectations. They get to rub shoulders with the local business people who get to ask them questions. Now, normally the media would turn up and we listen. And in recent years, it's been used as a good opportunity to actually put some real flesh on the rather anodyne and short statement that we got yesterday. So we would expect that the speech next week will give us some more details about Wheeler's thinking, about the way the things that really are troubling them, the things that they think perhaps might stay their hand and not raise interest rates, or the things that might actually push them over the edge and actually want them to drop interest rates. So we'll watch that with interest. The disappointment is that it's closed to the media, and I can't understand why.
Is that the first time that's happened, as far as you're aware?
Well, as far as I can remember, and I've covered a good half dozen of them personally down there, and I'd have to say that whosever decision it was to close it to the media, I think it's a dumb decision. I think it's a mistake. If they're trying to actually close off us hearing what people, a frank discussion between business people and the governor, really don't be so absurd and don't be so amateurish.
Yeah, good call, Giles. There's some figures out next week too, isn't there? What are we going to hear next week?
There are some big numbers. There'll be jobs numbers, and these are the sorts of numbers that that Graham Wheeler and his officials will be looking at. These are fourth quarter, so that's the 3 months ended December, employment and wages numbers. We expect that there will be a bit of a bounce back, that perhaps as many as 20,000 jobs will have been created, perhaps even a few more. But the unemployment rate won't change. In fact, it may possibly even go up. It's currently around 6%. Nobody's expecting that there will be much of an improvement in that this year. And that's largely because with record migration, remember, we had 62,000 people join the country last year. That swells the workforce. And of course, more people than there are jobs. That means in the end, the unemployment rate goes up. And of course, it also means that wages don't need to go up quite so much, because you can take your choice. If you're a boss, you can take your choice about what you pay workers. And if you've got people vying for it, they'll accept a lower wage rate, or in fact a slower wage increase.
Yeah. Let's look at the numbers for today, Giles.
Oh, look, I'll tell you, the top 50 index up 20 points.
Wow.
The market has gained this week. It's up around nearly 0.5%. And on that basis, as I said on Monday, a couple of good sessions, we could be back in record territory.
Giles Beckford, our business editor. Thanks, Giles. Have a great weekend. Giles Beckford live from Wellington. Let's go from Wellington to Nelson. A sentencing in the High Court in Nelson today has provided an end to the country's first ever people trafficking trial. This was a complex and difficult trial that lasted 6 weeks. It was last year and ended with 3 men being found not guilty of trafficking. However, 2 of the 3 were found guilty of lesser charges of supplying false information to Immigration New Zealand officials. They were sentenced this morning. 1 man has gone to prison for 2 years. He was found guilty of what Justice Robert Dobson called, quote, cooking up stories about the background of the Indian workers he was bringing into New Zealand so they could gain refugee status. He lied, but he didn't traffic. From RNZ's Nelson studio, Tracy Neal to tell us more about this unprecedented case.
Well, it's the end of an exhausting time for all involved, the jury, the lawyers, and of course the defendants who fought, among other things, some tough language barriers to defend themselves against these charges brought by Immigration New Zealand. The 3 men, Kulwant Singh and brothers Jaswinder Singh Sangha and Satnam Singh, they were found not guilty on the trafficking charges in a verdict late last year, but Kulwant and Jaswinder were then found guilty of supplying false information. Yeah. Kulwant has now gone to prison, and Jaswinder has been sentenced to almost a year in home detention and 300 hours of community work. Justice Dobson actually said today he agreed with the jury's verdict because the Crown was unable to prove that the workers at the centre of this case were actually deceived into coming to New Zealand by promises they would get work visas. That this case stemmed from accusations by 18 complainants that they were brought here from India in 2008 under false pretences. The Crown argued today the lesser charges still warranted prison sentences for each, while the lawyer for one of the 3, Stephen Zindel, described the situation as being one of desperate people who told free-flowing lies.
It was such a big case. Why was it so big? Why did it take so long, Tracy?
Well, there were language barriers all round. The 3 defendants had little or no English, so every word, every sentence was painstakingly channeled through an interpreter. Oh. Statements also came from more than a dozen witnesses, some of who were broadcast into the courtroom via Skype from Europe. And a lot of this hinged on the accuracy of the interpreter, as you can imagine. And there were several interpreters involved here. They changed them out regularly because it's a fairly exhausting task. And they were credited for their role in this case that produced more than 2,000 typed pages of evidence.
Holy moly. So at the end of all that, during sentencing, how were the 2 men in court?
Well, understandably pretty shattered, but Kulwant Singh, whose name was suppressed throughout the trial until the verdict, he was a man in despair this morning. He spent most of the hour and a half that the sentencing took with his head in his hands. Jaswinder was also very subdued and evidently suffering the health problems the court said today were serious and which had plagued him throughout the trial. He'd evidently been in quite a lot of pain. And both men suffered health problems, and Justice Dobson said it was a tragic departure from exemplary lives the pair had led in their communities.
Gosh, interesting comments from the judge all round. What has this case cost? A lot of money, I understand.
Yes, well, RNZ News lodged an application for that information late last year, and that information just came through this week. As we reported earlier, it's cost Immigration New Zealand $125,000 to bring to court. That doesn't sound like a great deal of money, but broken down, I mean, a big portion of that cost was on interpreters, flights to India to gather evidence and enough evidence to issue the search warrants and then do the arrests. More than 1,100 hours have been spent by the Crown so far, but they say the actual cost is not available because of the bulk funding environment the Crown works in now. Individual cases aren't actually invoiced, and I also understand today that one of the defendants received legal aid throughout this trial.
Tracy Neal from our Nelson studio. Coming up before 6, Helen Kelly. But first, the maker of My Little Pony video games is, well, going. Gameloft is worth $700 million on the Paris Stock Exchange, makes a Despicable Me game and opened a game-making studio in Nigeria just days ago. But it's not in New Zealand anymore, suddenly shutting its Auckland studio and axing 150 jobs despite receiving millions of dollars in government grants. So, has the money gone down the drain? What's happened here? Phil Pennington reports.
My Little Pony's signature music is easy to find. Not so the company's Asia-Pacific region chief, Maxime Delabelle, who, though he was in Auckland today, would not talk to our reporter or answer our repeated emails. The Guimo family, whose video game empire encompasses Gameloft, are also silent. The company's Auckland workers, who made up a quarter of the country's gaming labour force, are not surprised. Yesterday's announcement was sudden, but not a shock to them, says 3D animator Yahya Al-Mazri.
We saw the signs after the recent release of this farm game called Country Buddies. We were expecting that this game will not actually be making enough money and profit. Then we hear the news 2 weeks ago that there's an urgent staff meeting. Everyone started panicking, basically. They're like, okay, that's we could see the downfall of this studio.
Industry players expect a lot will find new jobs. Grinding Gear Games has already offered half a dozen work, and ex-Czech Republic game maker Dean Hall is hiring at his new Dunedin studio. Gameloft grew very big, at least for a local crew, very fast. In fact, 2 to 3 times industry expectations. It was quoted in an official case study just 4 months ago saying its New Zealand business could only grow from here. But things were bubbling away for the parent company in Paris, with rival Vivendi taking a big stake, a clutch of studios in other countries being shut, and others, like Nigeria, opened. New Zealand helped lure Gameloft here in the first place with government grants that have since totalled $4 million over several years. Now it wants the money back. The Science and Innovation Minister, Stephen Joyce.
There's several hundred companies across game developing, ICT, high-tech manufacturing, and that these growth grants of around 20% of their R&D. It's the same deal for everybody, and there's also a clawback provision. So let's say they didn't continue with their R&D in New Zealand, then Callaghan Innovation has the right to claw back that money off the company.
Gameloft this afternoon has confirmed to Callaghan that it has indeed closed, though it remains unclear just why. Callaghan says all but $5,000, which was in a separate student grant, can be clawed back. Stephen Joyce says he's not embarrassed, despite Gameloft featuring just last October as a ministry case study for high-tech, government-aided job creation.
Not at all. The reality is that in leading-edge industries, companies change and shift around all the time. You can't be looking to be a 100% success rate, or you wouldn't be involved in encouraging these industries in the first place, and they're very important to New Zealand's future.
The Taxpayers Union lobby group says it's just another example of the government trying and failing to pick winners. Small locally owned game makers who don't meet the threshold to get a grant, a $300k or more R&D spend, may well have looked at Gameloft in envy. Its size qualified it for public cash. But Game Developers Association Chair Stephen Knightley paints a very vivid flip side.
Gameloft were already a successful, maybe 80-person studio here in New Zealand before they received that grant, and that actually allowed them to set up an R&D team here. So it created, 50 or 60 extra jobs here. They have trained up and given experience to another whole generation of New Zealand game developers, some who have already moved on to other studios and some who have already set up their own studios.
So who now will step into the void left by the exit of the country's biggest game maker? Perhaps Pickpock, with their zombie-fleeing game Into the Dead. For Checkpoint, Phil Pennington.
Thanks, Phil. 5:45 on Checkpoint. Export New Zealand says the loss of cross-party support on free trade is deeply concerning. The Labour Party says it cannot support the Trans-Pacific Partnership in its current form, although one of its MPs will cross the floor to vote with the government. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell.
The Executive Director of Export New Zealand, Catherine Beard, says Labour's decision not to support the 12-nation trade deal is hugely disappointing.
For a few decades, we've had cross-party support for free trade agreements in New Zealand, and this is a worrying signal that that's no longer the case. And I think quite concerning for exporters, because really you've got to be competitive or you're not in the game.
Catherine Beard says it's hard to understand why Labour would support the China Free Trade Agreement but not the TPP, when she says the two deals are similar in all major respects. Labor says it can't support the TPP in its current form as it includes provisions that it says cut across the country's sovereignty. But Auckland University Associate Professor of Law Robert Scollay says there's really no clear answer to whether the TPP does in fact do that. He says being a member of the World Trade Organization imposes a number of limitations of that kind, but no one's talking about withdrawing from the WTO.
So really we need to look at the specific limitations on policy action that are contained in the TPP and discuss what our objections might be to them. Whether they actually undermine sovereignty is probably quite a lot in the eye of the beholder.
Labor's upset the government didn't get a carve-out in the TPP like Australia and Malaysia did to allow a future government to ban the sale of property to TPP nationals. But Robert Scollay says Australia and Malaysia already have those provisions in their domestic law, but New Zealand does not.
So we didn't have the same argument to use as Malaysia and Australia. But yeah, I guess there can be argument about whether, we won't know until we hear more about what happened in the negotiations, whether it was actually realistically possible for New Zealand to get that carve-out.
Robert Scollay says New Zealanders are unlikely to see any major changes in their day-to-day life as a result of the TPP. It's not clear yet what shape any TPP legislation will take when it comes to the New Zealand Parliament, but with Labor's Phil Goff having permission to cross the floor and the support of ACT and United Future, the government will have the numbers it needs to pass it. ACT's leader David Seymour says supporting the TPP is a no-brainer.
It means enormous advances in market access. It means investment, jobs and growth for the New Zealand economy. I think it's a very exciting thing, and we should be particularly proud that New Zealand has actually played the leading role in bringing together some of the largest economies in the world.
The United Future leader Peter Dunn says the deal is vital for New Zealand's long-term interests and the country cannot afford to not be part of it.
The legislation that Parliament is likely to pass will relate to consequential changes, and assuming it follows the spirit of similar legislation post other agreements, is likely to be of itself relatively non-contentious. But I think the bottom line is New Zealand cannot step off the world at this point and not join the TPPA.
The 12-nation agreement will be signed next week in Auckland. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Chris Bramwell.
11 and a half minutes to 6. A New Zealand man jailed in Myanmar for insulting the Buddhist faith has just arrived home in Wellington. Philip Blackwood was sentenced to 2.5 years prison with hard labour last March for using an image of Buddha to promote a cheap drinks night at the bar he managed in the country. The 33-year-old from Wellington has been released under a presidential amnesty. He was released early. Our reporter Alexa Cook is at Wellington Airport, where I think he's just touched down. Alexa, what's happening?
Well, he touched down about probably 10 minutes ago, and his father, actually Brian, touched down about half an hour before that and said he'd only managed to see him for 3 minutes in Auckland Airport. So as you can imagine, there was a big family reunion going on. There was both his parents, there was his wife, his child and his sister.
Any kind of statement? Did Philip Black, did he say anything?
The first thing he said was, "It's good to be home, eh?" And he says he's heading home to have a barbecue with his family tonight. And he's really just looking forward to, getting to hang out with them all again, because it's been, a long time since he's been able to hang out in their company.
Thank you so much, Alexa Cook. Just confirming, Philip Blackwood is back in Wellington. He was given 2.5 years in prison with hard labour last March. So he's back less than 12 months after that sentence under a presidential amnesty. Well, our next guest was raised in a union family and has given much of her adult life to the union movement. A fighter, not agreed with by all, but admired by many, including a surprisingly large number of her opponents. I'm going to swing round and address you as I say this, Helen Kelly. When Helen Kelly was diagnosed with terminal cancer, the president of the Council of Trade Unions gave up that job, but found herself with a new focus for her remarkable sense of purpose. Cannabis law reform, and immediately for you, Helen, legal access to cannabis for pain relief. And you've also made a submission to the Health Select Committee considering the issue of assisted dying. They're big subjects, but you've never been afraid of them, have you? Ever?
No, they are subjects that are right on the front of my mind at the moment, so I guess I've sort of got involved in them, and it seemed to me you couldn't take illegal cannabis and let other families to be absolutely deprived of it that would like to use it and not speak up, not take advantage of the privilege that you've got, getting what you need, and actually trying to push the issue forward.
So you've been sourcing illegal cannabis, right?
Yep.
What difference does it make to you?
It's fantastic. And, you know, when I was at Teachers College, I hardly smoked anything, but I smoked a little bit. So it's the first reintroduction to this drug. And I take it at night, and it just makes me sleep, and it gets rid of the pain. And I wake up hungry. You know, I don't throw up, which is all these symptoms you get from cancer.
Because you could have had morphine, right? Or something along those lines.
Yeah, well, I've got morphine, which is what they give you.
But it makes you feel terrible?
Yeah. It makes you feel exhausted, it blocks you up, you get a sore tummy. It doesn't last. So you wake up in the middle of the night really sore, and then you think, oh, if I take another one, I won't wake up properly in the morning. You know, I'll feel dopey in the morning. So the product I've applied for has got a day one and a night. It's the pens that people smoke when they're giving up smoking, e-pens. And they've got 2 different brands of cannabis oil, and they're 30% of the Californian market. They're highly regarded as medical products. And so during the day you can take a lighter one which doesn't get you stoned, and then during the night time you can take a stronger one.
And do you get a bit stoned at night time?
You do get stoned, yeah. Well, of course that's what eases the pain, right? But you're asleep, so I wake up not stoned. And
feeling much, much better than you otherwise would have felt.
Yeah.
Right.
And when I feel sick, my doctors say, can you take some more?
Right, good doctor.
Yeah.
But the doctor says take some more but can't give it to you.
Can't give it to me.
Okay,
and so here he is, he's filled in my application and said this would be hugely beneficial. It's a reputable product that New Zealand probably won't recognise because it's not pharmaceutical grade, even though none of the American products are. And I have to rely on Peter Dunn, you know.
Now Peter Dunn, in fact, I have a sneaking suspicion Peter Dunn's office, and maybe the Minister himself is listening to this. You sent something off. I'm a bit confused about who you sent it to, right? You sent
Ministry of Health.
The Ministry of Health.
Who then make a recommendation to him.
So you're waiting to hear back.
Yeah. And his mantra is when Alex Renton, who was in terrible trouble in Wellington Hospital.
Young man in Nelson.
Yeah, and his mother had to protest at hospital and all that sort of stuff. He said, when I finally got the approval, I approved it in an hour. And so, you know, here I am, day 2. I mean, you know, these things take time. I'm really teasing him about that. But that was his defence. I approved it in an hour. The system doesn't work. That's the problem. It's taken me months and months and months to get the product, to talk to the exporter. You know, I've got to get an import licence. I've got to go into hospital to have it administered if it's approved. I mean, it's a bloody pen with cannabis oil in it. You know, it's just insane.
It does seem anachronistic, doesn't it? Now, there will be people listening who think, no, this is the thin edge of the wedge. But actually, your argument is it makes a material difference, and it is much less dangerous, damaging and nausea-inducing than what you're actually already been offered.
Yeah, and while we can't get it legally, people are taking it illegally all around the country and giving it to kids and all sorts of stuff, untested, not designed for them. You know, it's insane.
You are such a singular person, aren't you? I mean, even when you're really, really crook, you want to have you just want to have a go. And I was looking at your Twitter page before, and there you are tweeting about farm hours again, which is, of course, it's very, you know, the incredibly long hours that people work. You just don't give up, do you? Where does that come from? That kind of fearlessness and tenacity.
Well, I don't know where it comes from, but it was part of the job, and that's why I got the job. And health and safety has been my baby, right? And it's not going to improve in this country while farmers are able to do what they like and be unaccountable. You know, they've got a special exclusion in the health and safety law.
And some of the jobs you've been, and all you do is tweet out jobs, right?
I know.
So you don't even editorialise much about it.
I know.
And some of them are 12 days on, 2 days off, 70 hours.
18 days on, 60 hours a week, less than the minimum wage per hour. You know, absolutely dangerous, and that explains to me not only the high turnover, we see massive turnover, almost 85% turnover in farming in 5 years. Very bad for the industry to get trained staff, you know. And then you see all these accidents.
So what would you like to see happen that is realistic given the fact that farming is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week?
Well, I would like an inquiry into farm work because I think it's a package. It's a package around terms and conditions, and they should regulate like they do for share milk contracts. Share milk contracts are set out in legislation. They should afford farm workers that privilege. They should investigate why these accidents are happening and talk to workers who have been hurt, because they'll tell you, well, I did it on the 56th hour, whatever. And they should say to the Federated Farmers, you have to have a sustainable, we're not going to train your farm workers anymore until you can show us you can keep 30%, 40% for a period of time. Government's got a lot of leverage here. I mean, they're bailing out drought farmers down south. They are prepared to engage with farmers around their issues. They should engage around this. It's a farming issue.
You still care so passionately about this, don't you?
Well, I mean, you can't read the paper and see these deaths going on in farming and not know that it's the ultimate deregulated labour market. There's not a single collective agreement on farms in New Zealand.
When did you start going hard on safety and forestry. When was that? 3-4 years ago?
Yeah, 2012.
Yeah, and actually forestry was terrible. I mean, it was killing its workers with such a reckless disregard that it just appeared cynical.
It had 6,500 staff and over 1,000 were on ACC and had been on ACC for more than a year. They were injured.
But now, actually, it's getting its act together, isn't it?
It's getting its act together, and they're proud of it. And the forestry owners have actually stepped into the space, which is what I find stunning.
So at first they would have thought, go away, Helen Kelly, leave us alone, you're a pain in the arse, you're unionist, all of that. And now they have bought in and they are proud of the upping of standards.
And they've got a standing committee that meets all the time that's talking about forestry safety. And the accident rate has gone down by 60%, serious harm, which is incredible in about 18 months. And we've had about 3 deaths, whereas we had 10 a year, 7 a year. Suddenly we're down to very few. And forestry workers tell me it's made a hell of a difference to their working conditions. And that's what we want to do in farming. We want to mirror it.
You made a submission to the Health Select Committee on discussing assisted dying. And this is a really important quote from a lovely thing you wrote for Fairfax, which people can find online. It says, I could let myself die now. I could refuse treatment quite lawfully and die rather quickly. Instead, I'm trying to live, which is actually what most terminally ill people want. We don't actually want to die.
Yeah.
And I think that when people get all emotive, which is entirely understandable about assisted dying, they think that there's an element of suicide about it. But in fact, you're not remotely interested in dying, are you?
No, and I don't know if I'd even use assisted suicide. In fact, a large number of people get the pills and never use it because I think it's 60 to 80% get their pills and never use them. But having them there is a security. Knowing that's an option if it got too bad is a security. It's an incredibly complicated and emotional topic, and I don't pretend to have my opinion to be absolutely right. And there is no argument against it because I think there are risks and they have to be managed, and a low-funded health system creates a risk. I know that. So I am worried about that because I can see the shortfalls in the health system.
So what was your submission?
My submission was basically I support it. It can be made to work. We can play with it. We can try it. We can put special regulations around it, and we could make it part of the health system in New Zealand with those prerequisites that someone who's dying, they have to consent and be in a position to consent, those sorts of things.
You started off as a primary school teacher, didn't you? Was it Johnsonville, Maine? Johnsonville, Maine. And you have given so much of your life to the union movement and to fighting. And
I got made the delegate on the first day. First year teacher.
I wonder why. They were prescient. What would you most like to see in New Zealand's future?
Well, there's lots of things I'd like to see around the environment, all those things, but for workers what I would like to see is industry collective employment agreements that extend across all those truck drivers, all the issues we're hearing about now, all the migrant workers. If there were more bargaining in New Zealand, hours of work would be secure, wages would go with the economy, go up as the economy allowed. But instead, most workers have absolutely no rights at all. They're just at the mercy of their employer.
We've got about 45 seconds. Always the trade unionist, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's in my blood, and it's important work. It's important work, and basically, unions are public institutions. They have to advocate these things. Just like the media. When the media's under attack, everyone gets anxious. When Parliament's under attack, judges. Why not the unions? We're public institutions.
Yes. I've got to do a back announce, and the back announce was we asked Peter Dunn to join us tonight, because I suspect his office is listening. Rob Eadie from his office is listening, and we asked him to join us and he declined. But we will follow up next week, and we look forward to discussing your decision when you get it.
Yeah, brilliant. You can come visit me in hospital when I get my first dose.
Okay. I'd love that. Thanks, Helen.
All right. Nice to see you, mate.
Fantastic to see you. Great to see you.
Bye.
Kia ora everyone, you're with Checkpoint with John Campbell on RNZ National. We're on the radio, we're screening live on Freeview Channel 50 and streaming live on the RNZ website. However you are doing so, thank you for joining us. Coming up, New Zealand's Olympic chef de mission on their advice for Rio-bound athletes and officials. No more fluoride in Whakatane's water. And Auckland Airport, New Zealand's largest publicly listed company, incredibly, marks half a century. But first, here's the news with Katrina Batten.
Ngā mihi nui, good evening. 9 people who've arrived in New Zealand from the South Pacific have been recorded as having the Zika virus. One of them, a 47-year-old Waikato man, has been admitted to Waikato Hospital with symptoms of a neurological condition thought to be linked to Zika. The disease has also been linked to severe birth defects in thousands of Brazilian babies. The Chief Medical Officer for the Ministry of Health, Dr. Don Mackey, says women should delay getting pregnant for at least 3 weeks after returning from Zika-infected countries. He says information coming in about the virus is changing all the time. Dr. Mackey says the ministry has extended its specific travel advice on the virus to include Tonga as well as Samoa as an area of active transmission. And a former Olympian says female athletes travelling to the Rio Olympics face a difficult decision. The New Zealand Olympic Committee is advising all athletes who are pregnant or hoping to get pregnant in the near future not to travel to Brazil in August. 5-time Olympian Barbara Kendall had 2 children while she was still competing at an Olympic level. She told Checkpoint athletes typically train for about 8 years before going to the Olympics.
It's a big decision, but I think if you're a smart person, you go, okay, I'm going to go to the Olympic Games, I've worked my life for this, I'm going to do it, tick that box, and then I'll look at, starting a family once I'm all clear.
Former Olympian Barbara Kendall. The World Health Organization says the mosquito-borne Zika virus has spread explosively through 23 countries in the Americas. It's called an emergency meeting on Monday. Virgin Australia has joined Air New Zealand and Qantas in suspending all services into Vanuatu over the safety of the airport runway. It's not clear how long the runway will take to repair or when work might start. Owen Drew, who owns the Tranquility Island Resort in Port Vila, told Checkpoint half of those who have booked are now cancelling.
We're getting cancellations where people can't come because their flight's been cancelled or they're under the impression that it's too dangerous for them to fly. We're going to be very hard pushed to make ends meet. We're planning on putting some of our staff on leave.
Vanuatu tourism operator Owen Drew. The suspensions are a huge blow to Vanuatu's tourism industry, which is still reeling from damage caused by Cyclone Pam last year. Ian Wishart's latest book on the murder of Ben Smart and Olivia Hope has been withdrawn from sale following a legal threat. The book, called Elementary, was released this morning but withdrawn from sale this afternoon. The author of another book on the case, Keith Hunter, has confirmed he made the legal threat, saying he's currently reading Wishart's book. Earlier today, Ian Wishart says his book draws on the police file and includes evidence that Scott Watson had an accomplice who helped him get rid of the bodies. Watson is serving a life sentence with a minimum non-parole period of 19 years for the murder of Ben Smart and Olivia Hope. Contenders for the Republican Party nomination in the United States presidential election have begun a crucial televised debate, but the frontrunner Donald Trump has boycotted the event. Mr. Trump is protesting against the event organiser, Fox News, and one of the debate hosts has referred to him as the elephant not in the room. One of those taking part, Ted Cruz, referred to Mr. Trump's absence early on.
I'm a maniac, and everyone on this stage is stupid, fat, and ugly. And Ben, you're a terrible surgeon. Now that we've gotten the Donald Trump portion out of the way, I want to thank everyone here for showing the men and women of Iowa the respect to show up and make the case to the people of this state and the people of the country why each of us believe we would make the best commander-in-chief.
Ted Cruz, a US Republican presidential contender. Severe storms lashed parts of the New South Wales east coast, causing flooding on Sydney streets and cutting power to about 20,000 properties. Some homes and businesses have also been flooded in Tasmania, from where the ABC's Richard Baines reports.
Tasmania's northeast has been battered by heavy rain. Some homes in the small town of St Mary's have taken on water, and the local bakery has closed after being inundated with water. One resident says he will have to rip up and replace the floor in his house. Conditions in the town have eased, but more rain is expected in the coming days. The nearby township of Grey has received 224 millimetres of rain in the past 24 hours.
Richard Baines in St Mary's in Tasmania. Met Service is warning thunderstorms building across the central North Island threaten to bring torrential rain and flash flooding to some areas. Forecasters say the region from east of Lake Taupō across to Lake Waikaremoana is particularly at risk of flooding and slips. They say driving conditions will also be hazardous with flooding and poor visibility in heavy rain. In sport, the disgraced Sydney Roosters halfback Mitchell Pearce has admitted he has a problem with alcohol. Pearce briefly addressed media today and apologised for his lewd behaviour at a Boozy Australia Day party. Meanwhile, the Warriors star Shaun Johnson admits he's a bit apprehensive about making his return to the rugby league field in next weekend's Auckland Nines after being out of action since breaking his ankle last July.
Oh, yeah, I think any time you do an injury, just like the boys that have done knees, you don't want to do it again. You don't want to go through what you've been through. So, yeah, touch wood, any bit of wood you can touch, man. I'm hoping I can stay injury-free and healthy.
Roosters import Roger Tuivasa-Sheck will make his Warriors debut at the Nines, while ex-Rabbitoh Isaac Luke has been left out of the squad due to injury. Sonny Bill Williams should pull a few more fans to the Wellington Rugby Sevens, which starts tomorrow, but the event's looking unlikely to be anywhere near a sellout. But the All Black Sevens coach Sir Gordon Titchens isn't concerned about the possible low crowd numbers.
They're all sold out, aren't they? No, I mean, to be fair, mate, you got a great team. Perhaps we get a whole lot of turn up on the day, but any crowd, from our perspective, it'd be great to have a great crowd. If they're not there, I'm sure we'll still get a lot of support from the people that are there.
Sir Gordon Titchens says he's planning to use the new rolling substitutions rule to help ease his Super Rugby players such as Sonny Bill Williams into the tournament. And the New Zealand Breakers begin a string of must-win Australian Basketball League games tonight at home to the Townsville Crocodiles. That's the news.
Radio New Zealand weekly podcasts, The Week in Review, Best of the Week and Extra Time. For news, there's The Week in Review, a wrap of the week's leading news coverage and interviews. For Radio New Zealand national interviews and programs, try The Best of the Week and weekly sports features and Extra Time from Radio New Zealand Sport. The Week in Review, Best of the Week and Extra Time. Weekly podcasts and downloads at radionz.co.nz.
Met service weather to midnight tomorrow. From Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country, also Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Fine spells with scattered showers during the afternoons and evenings, some heavy and possibly thundery from Bay of Plenty southwards and also in Northland tomorrow. Whanganui to Kapiti, generally fine, however isolated showers tomorrow, mainly about the ranges. Wellington and Wairarapa often cloudy with isolated showers for a time tomorrow. Marlborough, Nelson and Buller, a mix of fine and cloudy periods with isolated showers, mainly about the ranges. Westland and Fiordland mainly fine apart from isolated showers about the ranges today. Canterbury, Otago and Southland cloudy near the coast with patchy drizzle. Fine spells inland with isolated showers today, and the Chatham Islands mostly cloudy with a few showers. It's 6:08.
Thanks, Katrina. Have a wonderful weekend.
I will, thank you. You too.
Cheers, Katrina Batten, our newsreader on Checkpoint. The Zika virus, which is causing birth defects and infant deaths in South America, has now moved a lot closer to home. The Ministry of Health received its first Zika notifications of the year, involving 9 travellers recently arrived from the South Pacific. We need to stress there have been no transmissions in New Zealand. The Ministry of Health has now extended its Pacific travel advice on the virus to include Tonga as well as Samoa as active areas of transmission. And the New Zealand Olympic Committee is advising all athletes who are pregnant or hoping to get pregnant in the near future not to travel to the Rio Olympic Games in August. Rob Waddell is the New Zealand Olympic Committee's chef de mission. Rob, it's lovely to have you on the program. Thank you for joining us. This is kind of a lose-lose for you, really, isn't it? Because whatever advice you give is going to be tough.
Yeah, well, obviously it's a variable which is, it's sprung up, and we don't like seeing these things and the risk that it poses to our athletes and our team and the support staff that travel with us. So probably what we're looking to do, John, is work really closely alongside the government and the Ministry of Health to make sure that we're aligned and that the advice that they're giving is very much on the same page of what we're communicating to our team. And
I think this is rapidly moving, and that's the issue, isn't it? For example, the period within which one would not want to get pregnant after being in a Zika-infested area seems to be changing. It varies between 3 weeks and 2 years. So you will listen to advice, you will get counsel from people who know, and you could review this kind of advice?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's the key thing for us at the moment is that, there has been an advisory from the Go Out, and obviously we support that. At the same time, I think there's an awareness that there's still a lot of understanding to come in about the threat that's there, and so our medical team are certainly reviewing the situation and probably look at it in two ways. And one is from an advisory and travel point of view, and the second is, I guess, the prevention strategies around that.
Who's advising you at the moment?
From the Olympic Committee's point of view, we look to our main chief medical advisor, that's Dr. Bruce Hamilton, who works with the New Zealand Olympic Committee and High Performance Sport New Zealand.
And have you heard from female officials, athletes or whatever? Are they phoning you and saying, Rob, what do we do?
Well, look, obviously there's some sensitivities around privacy issues and things like that there, but I think that's something that Bruce and his medical staff may or may not be dealing with. But we are still a period out from the games. We're not going tomorrow. There are still months there, so we're certainly looking to try and nail down the implications for the team as fast as we can, and working closely with government on that, and making sure that that's communicated really well to the team, so no one's left in any sort of ambiguity.
Rob Waddell, New Zealand Olympic Committee Chef de Mission. Thanks for joining us, Rob. Appreciate it. 11.5 minutes past 6 on Checkpoint. Boy, it doesn't seem this long ago. NASA has remembered crew members aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger who died after the shuttle exploded. On this day in 1986, Jennifer Davis from Reuters filed this report.
3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff of the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
It was a day of remembrance for NASA as it marked the 30th anniversary of the Space Shuttle Challenger explosion.
I'd like to just take a moment of silence and recognize the sacrifice of all those crew members and how their spirit and their legacy lives on in our achievement in space.
From silence in space,
somewhere in between mystery and a dream, I feel,
to music and remembrances at the Kennedy Space Center in Cape Canaveral. NASA honored the 6 astronauts and 1 teacher killed on January 28, 1986, when a booster engine failed just 73 seconds after launch, causing Challenger to explode.
They've shown us that exploration is not without risk, that we can learn from our mistakes and be better for them in the end.
Former astronaut John McBride's voice broke as he called out the names of those killed.
Michael J. Smith, Judith A. Resnick,
It was an equally somber scene at Arlington National Cemetery. As NASA Administrator Charles Bolden and other agency officials laid a wreath honoring the crews of Space Shuttle's Challenger as well as Columbia and Apollo 1.
30 years ago. Incredible. We're hoping to talk to the Deputy Mayor of Whakatane about fluoride or not in the water there. It's going 6-5. The council voted against it, but she's on a plane. If she gets off the plane before the end of Checkpoint, we will talk to her. But today marks the 50th anniversary of Auckland Airport. Have a listen to this.
January the 29th, 1966, and 98,000 people swarmed to Mangere for the opening of Auckland's new £10 million international airport.
I declare the Auckland Airport open.
Over 90,000 people turned up. Adrian Littlewood, who's the Auckland Airport CEO, is joining us in the studio. Nice to have you here, Adrian.
Thanks, John.
And congratulations. You weren't anywhere near even born when Auckland...
No, I wasn't. No.
Yeah, okay.
No, but there were plenty of people who were there on the day.
Yeah. Have you spoken to people who were there on the day?
I have today. I actually have been to many events, including one with the very first customs officers. For them, today is also the 50th anniversary of the first customs office at Auckland, and they were recounting many memories of their time at Auckland, some of them which aren't worthy repeating in public, but very fond memories of that first day. So they all hold that very close.
That was the sort of movie reel footage, and people could hear it and possibly see it. But what is amazing about a 90,000 plus crowd is just the wonder of aviation, isn't it?
Well, think it is, and I think it goes to generally people's distinct love of travel, and I think that's a uniquely New Zealand passion that we all share. And so I think people always get excited about travel, and we know certainly whenever we put a story out or the airlines put a story out, they are very, very popular because I think it talks to that passion for travel.
What we also need to talk about is the seriousness of Auckland Airport in the life of New Zealand. You are our largest publicly listed company, which strikes me as extraordinary. Tourism now contributes more to the New Zealand economy than dairy farming.
That's right.
More than 3 million tourists came to New Zealand in the year to the end of November. You guys have to get it right, don't you?
Well, look, we do, and I think we are, having the happy coincidence, I think, of, a burgeoning middle class in Asia. Lower fuel prices are helping, and a new generation of aircraft which are making travel long haul much more efficient and cheaper.
Well, so Emirates today announcing direct flights to Dubai, right?
The world's longest flight, single-step flight for a short period. So that's a great announcement for today. But look, I think it's the happenstance of those forces that are all combining to really open up some new markets for New Zealand.
What's the balancing act, though? Because are the interests of your shareholders always the same as the interests of the country?
Well, look, I think there's strong alignment, and I think we all have an obligation to make sure it is done well, and we're focusing on the right kind of tourist for New Zealand. But I think New Zealand ultimately is a premium destination if you look at it relative to other locations around the world. So we do naturally attract people who really value a high quality experience. We want to continue with that.
You say we're focusing on the right kind of tourists for New Zealand. Do you help determine the right kind of tourists for New Zealand? Because surely the airlines and the tourist bookers decide that. Aren't you just the venue where they come and go, or is it more than that?
Well, that was certainly our history. We were mostly infrastructure and operators, but nowadays airports around the world are changing. We're certainly in line with that. So we work very closely with all the airlines who fly to Auckland and those prospective partners in the future. We also work with Tourism New Zealand, for example, but also tourism agencies in overseas markets and the travel trade in those markets. So we have people on the ground in China, partners in Japan and Korea and India who we work with directly.
And what do you talk to them about?
We talk to them basically about how do we make and attract tourists to travel on the capacity in the flights that are coming to New Zealand already, because we have an interest, as the airlines do, in filling those planes up.
And what do they want?
Well, they want what New Zealand has to offer, which is a fantastic experience. It's actually about getting close to nature in many ways, and that close first-hand experience to both people and nature that they really, really love. And there's so many great anecdotes, but one I've heard from someone who was very keen on golf in China, who we hear a lot about the air quality in China, and he just said to me really simply, for him, his golf ball flew further through the air of New Zealand because it was so fresh and clean. And that's how he perceived it. For him, air quality was number one because that's what he thought about every day when he was living in Beijing. So those little anecdotes can carry a long way. And I think New Zealand's, the awareness of New Zealand and the product we have has really lifted up in the stakes. So I think that's very exciting.
Yeah. What about poor old Vanuatu and this airport in Port Vila? This is just, I was staggered to see Vanuatu's GDP is less than $1 billion.
Yeah.
And so every cent matters in that country, and the notion that planes can't get in there is terrible, isn't it?
Well, look, and I think this is a really important point, because if we think about foreign investment, and there's a lot of discussion in business circles and in government about the importance of foreign investment, but if you think about airplanes, they are essentially mobile capital flying around the world, foreign mobile capital, and roughly, at a rough rule of thumb, a 777 aircraft, Boeing 777, flying here daily generates about $150 million in export earnings for this country, and you can turn it on and turn it off. So the work that all the tourism industry does, that we do, the airlines do, to attract travellers to New Zealand and that capacity pays significant benefits to our whole country, and it flows throughout the country. It's not just about the cities, it's about the regions. The ability to have and run your own business in Napier and Nelson off the back of tourism can only be a good thing.
Happy 50th anniversary, Auckland Airport. Adrian Littlewood, the CEO of Auckland Airport. Thanks for joining us in the studio.
Thank you.
Right, coming up on World Watch at 6:30 with John Grieve, several Nordic countries are planning to deport tens of thousands of asylum seekers. Gosh, it's fascinating to watch what's unfolding there. And one of Japan's most senior ministers stands down over corruption allegations. That's with John Grieve on World Watch in 10 minutes and 15 seconds. Time to head to a pretty busy week in sport, or weekend in sport. We're going to talk sport with Matt. League, sevens, football, basketball, tennis, it's all on. Let's start with the rugby nines. The big weekend in Auckland next weekend, and there's good news and bad news according to Matt Chatterton. Sean Johnson is in, Isaac Luke is out.
Sean Johnson is making his long-awaited return from to the NRL. After last year, he broke his ankle in the Manly Sea Eagles game that they lost in July. So he's obviously gone through all the rehabilitation and recovery, and obviously a lot of strength and conditioning, and yeah, no, he's back to full capacity.
People love this guy, don't they? He's a crowd favourite.
He sure is. Well, he's so exciting to watch with that sidestep and just the flick passes that he can produce. He's really a real talent. And then obviously Roger Tuivasa-Sheck, the Roosters import that we now have at the Warriors, he's going to be on show as well. Very talented fullback, young man, so he's going to be playing. But yeah, unfortunately, Isaac Luke, the Kiwis captain, he won't be playing for the Warriors in the Nines. He's picked up a couple of little niggles to injuries throughout the summer, so he won't unfortunately be available.
Okay, that's the Nines. The Sevens in Wellington this weekend. Ticket sales are, you're making a face for people on radio, ticket sales are abysmal, aren't they?
They are a bit. Around about 12,000 last time that
Capacity,
we had a look.
what,
34,000, yeah. And I even see that the Backbenchers bar was offering tickets to people that buy beers at Backbenchers, so that shows you how the desperation for people for organisations to get people to the games. So yeah, not too sure. I mean, the likes of Sonny Bill and Artie Savia are playing, but that still hasn't been much of a draw
How's
card.
their fitness, those 15s boys?
Well, Titch has actually come out, Sir Gordon Titch has come out and said that they aren't quite at the level he would like yet, which is somewhat of a concern, you would think, because, they've been in that environment now for a wee while. But obviously, it takes time to get up to the standards that Titch has. And also, you have
to see, he sets the bar. Sorry, that's the point you were just making.
Yeah.
He sets the bar as high as anyone. And
indeed.
Yeah, okay. Breakers playing Townsville Crocs tonight at Vector. Last time they were playing the Townsville Crocs, you and I picked that they were just going to whap them, and then they went and lost.
Yeah, I shouldn't be like the Oracle. I should not pick these things at all.
Let's make no predictions and simply say this is a really important game for the Breakers, right?
Yes, they pretty much need to win every single remaining game to have any shot of making the playoffs. I think they've got either 4 or 5 games remaining now. So, yeah, tonight they really do need to get along across the line.
Have they lost their mojo with those personnel changes in management?
I'm not too sure. I mean, you obviously had the boys in here yesterday.
Yeah, and they're wonderful men.
They are. Whether they've clocked out early because, the season does feel like it's getting away on them, time will tell. It'll sort of depend on how they play over the next few weeks. The Breakers always talk about, they need to play at their high intensity level that we know them for over the past 4 or 5 seasons where they've won championships. That's sort of been lacking the last few weeks. So if they can get back to that intensity that they talk about, that Mika Vakona always talks about, then there is the possibility that they will make it. But yeah, they really do need to lift that game.
And they have to win game after game after game after game for weeks, right? Mm-hmm. Football, Phoenix versus the Mariners in Christchurch. So the Phoenix are travelling south from Wellington. How are ticket sales going for that game?
Not too good either. Last time I checked, they were about 5,000 from what I saw in reports. I mean, it is quite exciting though. They have a former Barcelona and Liverpool midfielder playing for the Mariners who only came over to the country.
This?
Luis Garcia. So, got a massive name from Europe coming over and playing for the Mariners. I mean, I thought that would be quite a draw card for a number of people to come and watch him play, because he's a very exciting midfielder to watch. But yes, unfortunately, sales at this point aren't looking good.
Oh, okay, let's go to the Aussie Open to end our sports chat for the week. Venus, the Serena. So I'm not saying this in an objectifying way or in an inappropriate way because this is national radio, but I'm besotted with her. She is just so good.
She made
Serena.
Agnieszka Radwanska look like an amateur.
Eat my dust.
She 6-love 6-4, I think it was, in the semi. Considering she has come back from injury and hadn't played any tournaments in the lead up to this, is quite remarkable. She's going up against Angelique Kerber from Germany. She's ranked about 7th seed, I believe. So
Angelique is going to need a meteor shower or something to win that game.
Yeah, something's really going to have to go her way unless Serena is struck down with the flu or something. I can't see it sort of not going to Serena.
She's extraordinary.
She is.
Her athleticism, her power, her timing, her singularity.
She's chasing her 7th title at the Australian Open. I think it would make it 22 Grand Slam titles if she wins it, which would equal Steffi Graf's record in the Open era. So there's, obviously she's pushing for that record. Then in the men's draw, we've got tonight Andy Murray playing Canada's Milos Raonic. Now, Raonic has one of the fastest serves in the game. I think the other night I was watching, he got up to 232 Ks.
Holy moly.
Quite impressive, yeah. So he's an absolute machine, that guy. Whether or not he'll get past Andy Murray is yet to be seen. Andy Murray's an incredibly talented defensive player, so he will be able to handle that big serve, I have a feeling. But, I mean, if Milos is on his game with his serve, it could prove to be a very good game. And then, of course, the final will be between whoever wins between Murray and Raonic and Novak Djokovic, the world number one. He dispatched Roger Federer last night in 4 sets.
Yeah, I love Fed,
Yeah, a lot of people do. And even the fans last night watching the game, they were all behind Federer. There barely seemed to be much of an applause for Djokovic when he was winning.
But the best player won, right, on the night.
He did.
He's so good.
He did indeed. Yeah, no, he's another great defensive player as well. That's what makes him and Murray so good. They can just recover so well and they're so fast on the court. They can seem to cover any part of the court, really. It's ridiculous.
Thanks for your sports chats this week, Matt Chatterton.
No worries.
Matt Chatterton, who is our Auckland-based sports reporter, excellent sports team at Radio New Zealand. Lots and lots of feedback. I'm going to read some of it out. Let's go back to Zika, which we began the program with, or was near the top of the program. Annie says, don't get bitten by mosquitoes, which was the advice being given. Yeah, right. People who glibly give this advice have obviously never been in mosquito-infested tropical countries. Ina says, yes, it's hard to postpone wishes of parenthood if you also want to be an Olympian, but aren't we blimmin' lucky that we know that we may be at risk to begin with? We have good information and can be forewarned. We have access to birth control, and on top of that, we're allowed to make our own choice. Lots of response to the crisis in Vanuatu. One listener has offered to donate money to build a better runway for Vanuatu. Maybe some airlines could donate. Actually, that's a lovely text. The World Bank has actually put the money up, and this seems a bit confusing that it hasn't happened yet. But then, of course, the political situation in Vanuatu with fraud, corruption, snap election, and all of the uncertainty surrounding who was actually in government and which of their MPs aren't in prison has rather derailed that process. So the money exists, and the word from Vanuatu is that it's going to happen very fast, hopefully within weeks. And gosh, that city needs it. Lots and lots of response to Helen Kelly. Blessings to you, Helen Kelly. You represent the very best of what it is to be a New Zealander. Bless you, Ronald. Thank you so much. Bless Helen Kelly for her wonderful achievements and ongoing efforts on behalf of workers in New Zealand. She's inspirational, says Leith. And Jan Moore sent us this email. Dear John, thank you for the excellent interview with Helen Kelly. Your questions were both sensitive and empathetic. Thank you, Jan. What an inspirational person Helen is, still advocating for others while so ill herself. Many of our politicians could learn a lot about humanity and safety from her. We are enjoying our RNZ with pictures very much. Lots of you commenting on getting us through Freeview 50. Some of you aren't getting us through Freeview 50. We are live streaming radionz.co.nz/checkpoint. And you can watch us that way, or you can just listen to us on the radio, because we are still making radio. The idea of the pictures is that you could just see us doing it. Now, we're going to end the week with a magnificent piece of absurdity. A school in northeastern England is reprimanding parents who don't get dressed before bringing their children to school, warning it's a bad example to drop your kids off wearing pyjamas. Truly. Here's Diane Hodges from Reuters.
The head of a school in northeastern England is warning parents to get in step and wear proper clothes when they bring their children to school. Skern Park Academy sent a note home to parents telling them to dress appropriately in the mornings.
You know, to have that sort of routine where you're getting up and your mum and dad are dressed on a morning, and then you're getting ready for school and you're coming and you're ready to learn. I think it sets a really good routine for children for the future and for their future sort of aspirations for their own lives.
But the letter got low marks from this pajama-clad parent.
Don't think it's right. I think if people are stuck and late like everybody else, then they should be able to fetch their kids to school in whatever can, as long as they can get here.
The notice sparked a free-for-all on social media, with some taking the teacher's side and others siding with the pajama-wearing parents. No doubt providing plenty of entertainment for the students, no matter which side ends up on top.
My children went to the local school, as children do, and there was a particularly difficult-to-dress child at the school who on many occasions just did a kind of stalemate with their parents and refused to get out of their pyjamas and frequently arrived at school in them. It was magnificent. I think one day he arrived at school wearing a pair of knickers and a t-shirt because he couldn't be bothered wearing anything else. That's attitude. 20 seconds before the end of the week, nothing from the Deputy Mayor of Whakatane about fluoride in the water there. The story is available on our website. She's on the plane, unfortunately. Fascinating issue. Whakatane taking water out of fluoride out of the water there by a vote of 6-5. Thank you for listening this week. We really appreciate your company.
You're listening to RNZ National, where it's 6:30. Welcome to World Watch PM. I'm John Greaves. Tonight in our shorter show, our World Health Organization warning of a possible pandemic, a New Zealand broker's plead of conspiracy charges, an act of defiance by an outgoing president, and a special search by Britain's intelligence agency. Those stories in World Watch PM. Well, as you may have heard in Checkpoint, there's an alarming warning from scientists today who've predicted the mosquito-borne Zika virus could infect up to 4 million people across the Americas. They've described it as having explosive pandemic potential. The ABC's Lisa Miller reports.
The fast-spreading Zika virus appears to have caught the world by surprise. At World Health Organization headquarters in Geneva, Director General Dr. Margaret Chan said Zika had gone from a mild threat to one of alarming proportions.
Last year, the virus was detected in the Americas, where it is now spreading explosively. As of today, cases have been reported in 23 countries and territories in the region. The level of alarm is extremely high.
She says the link between birth defects and the virus hasn't been proven, but that's no comfort for pregnant women in Brazil, where an estimated 1 million people are infected. Months out from the Rio Games, the president of the International Olympic Committee is trying to reassure athletes and spectators they're treating it as a priority.
The virus issue, there we are in close contact with the World Health Organization. You may know that President Rousseff has called for a South American summit in this respect.
They're currently contacting all national Olympic committees. Next week, WHO members will meet again to decide if the Zika virus outbreak should be declared an international health emergency.
Lisa Miller reporting. Several Nordic countries are planning to deport tens of thousands of asylum seekers in response to Europe's migration crisis. Sweden believes as many as 80,000 migrants will either leave voluntarily or be forced to go. Melissa Clark reports from London.
Sweden has long prided itself on welcoming refugees in need of a safe haven. But last year, 163,000 people sought asylum in Sweden, numbers the Nordic nation is struggling to cope with. The Swedish government has announced plans to send home those not found to be refugees, which it expects will be between 50 and 80,000 people. Migration Minister Morgan Johansson.
And of course, many of these people that, for instance, those who have come from the war in Syria, but also other groups, will be permitted to stay in Sweden. But there are other groups, and each individual case is tried individually, that will not be able to stay in Sweden because our courts will say that, well, you don't meet the criteria for that.
Those who try to stay will be forced to go.
First of all, voluntarily, of course, but in the end, if you don't go back voluntarily, there is a possibility to do this by force instead.
It's not just Sweden. Finland is planning to return 20,000 migrants found not to be refugees back to their countries of origin. That's close to 2/3 of those who arrived, hoping to stay. Norway wants to send 5,500 people back over their border with Russia, saying they were safe there and hadn't needed to seek asylum in Norway. The European nations would prefer the asylum seekers to return home voluntarily, and some are. The Iraqi embassy in Berlin has issued 1,500 passports in recent months for those wanting to return home, and several hundred have already left. But the few hundred leaving are just a fraction of the thousands still arriving. Around 2,000 people a day are landing on Greece's islands to start their journey to Europe. 80 have died in the last week alone. A Dutch political party has proposed ferrying all asylum seekers who arrive in Greece back to Turkey and in exchange taking more refugees from Turkish camps. Europe is still searching for a solution, and the refugees and migrants still seeking sanctuary.
The ABC's Europe correspondent Melissa Clark. And New Zealand has been cleared of helping to rig the key LIBOR lending rate between banks. A London jury had cleared 5 other defendants on Wednesday. Our